We're recording. Welcome, everybody. It is so nice to be here for our second installment for making meaning in modern midrash, and it's really fabulous to have you all here with us. And I'm so excited to welcome my colleague and friend to our class today. And so I want to introduce Rachel. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me start over. I'm really excited to introduce my colleague and friend, Rabbi Rachel Behrman, who is just a tremendous person, rabbi, scholar, like neshama. She's got the best heart. And I met Rachel. We're so informal at Temple Israel. I hope you don't mind. I met her through the Women's Rabbinic Network, and you've all heard me talk about this network of Reform rabbis that I've been involved with really since before I was even a rabbi, as I was still a student. And it's been a big part of my rabbinate, and consequently your life at Temple Israel, because I brought a lot of it to you. And I met Rabbi Behrman through that. And so I want to do a mini introduction of her, and we want to share our love of Midrash with you today. So Rabbi Rachel Behrman is the new associate rabbi at Congregation Shar Emeth. Now, that may be a familiar name to some of you. Did you recognize the name? Shar Emeth is in St. Louis. And there's another rabbi who you may know there, and that's Rabbi Bennett, who happens to be our Rabbi Bennett's brother. So we feel this great connection to Shar Emeth, and through Rabbi Bennett and through Rabbi Behrman. I was so impressed to hear that your family comes from Memphis, has been there for 8 generations, part of the Jewish community in Memphis, Tennessee, which is so amazing. She went to Middlebury College. She has a degree in religious studies. And out of her bio, one thing that really stood out to me was how she won the Rabbi Morris H. Youngerman Memorial Prize for her sermon entitled Finding and Honoring Women's Voices. And those of you who know me well know that as something that really just speaks straight to my heart, and exactly the kinds of work that I've been doing. And so I really just feel this great connection with you. She is currently on the board of the Women's Rabbinic Network as the Vice President of Communications and Marketing. The thing that brings Rabbi Behrman to us today is that she's the co-creator and co-author of Midrashic Monologues, a project that strives to restore the voices of biblical characters who have been silenced by Jewish tradition. And so it's truly my great honor and just pleasure to invite you here with us today for our class, and for us to talk a little bit about what modern midrash is, how you became involved in it, and why you love it so much, and a little bit about the process of writing modern midrash, and like how like any of us can get engaged in that process as well. I want to tell you all that Rabbi Behrman and I had this conversation about maybe 2 weeks ago now, about a week, or I have no sense of time anymore, but a week or two ago, about what we wanted to talk about here. And I just wish you could have all been flies on the wall then, because it was such a fabulous conversation. I just was so inspired by her and by our conversation. And so I want you to engage with Rabbi Behrman, ask questions. Don't be shy. None of you are shy. So don't be shy. Be yourselves. Ask questions. This is an opportunity to talk about Midrash and hear from somebody who's been doing this work for several years. And I'd also love to know how that project came to be, Midrashic Monologues. And so I'm going to stop talking. I'll mute myself, and I'm going to actually spotlight you so that in the recording, you don't want me to spotlight you?
No, that's fine. If I take myself off of spotlight, so I'm not the biggest on the screen, that won't mess with the recording, will it?
Not at all. What it does is it just lets us see you, and also in the recording would allow you to be the center, but we can take you off at any time. Just say unspotlight, and we'll look at the group maybe for more conversation. It's nice to see everybody's face.
That's perfect. So Marla, thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I'm going to take myself off of spotlight for myself, at least, because I want to see all of your faces. I'm very honored by the introduction and by the invitation to be with you today. As Marla said, we met I guess it was many years ago at this point with the Devorah, which has been in such an incredible group that I've found so much meaning and belonging to. And it's just been such an honor to be your friend and colleague, Marla. And I'm so excited to be with all of you today. And especially because I get to talk about Midrash, which is the topic, one of the topics that if anyone even mentions within my hearing, I'm like, oh, Midrash? Do you want to talk about Midrash? Let's talk about it for several hours. All right, let's go. As Marla, and it's okay for me to call you Marla. It's okay for, I can be Rachel on this call. I was Rachel well before I was a rabbi, but the idea of talking about Midrash is just something that's so close to my heart. And now that I'm in my new position in St. Louis, I love all these extra connections between Temple Israel and Shir Emath. And it's just a real pleasure to be with all of you today. So I could quite literally talk about this for several hours. So I'm going to skim through my journey to Midrash, and then I want to share with you one of my modern Midrashim. Then I really just want to have a conversation, if that's okay with all of you, about what this could bring to your life, what parts of it feel uncomfortable and maybe want to unpack. Because my ideal situation is not that I and other rabbis are out in the world writing Midrashim and that's the only source of Midrashim. Truly becoming a Midrashic author has changed my understanding of Judaism and my understanding of my role within Judaism. And I wish for everyone to feel that kind of empowerment. So I'm hoping that we can have a conversation about where might some holdups for you be so that you can overcome them and really run through them. So I assumed that I would not be an author. I actually have a hard time calling myself an author. Last year I called my grandfather and I said, what's the difference between an author and a writer? Because I was brushing up my resume so that I could apply to this job. And I wanted to put Midrashic author, but then I thought, what makes you an author instead of just someone who writes things and then puts them on the website that they control of. So it's not like they're being published. And it ultimately doesn't matter because writing Midrash, whatever you call yourself, means that you are putting yourself into the story. And I know that you already spoke about what Midrash is in your previous class, but that is a transformative moment in my Judaism, and I hope for all of our Jewish relationships. Because I have loved Torah since forever. I decided to become a rabbi when I was 16. And the first thing I did was start going to weekly Torah study because I thought, well, I have to know the whole Torah in order to get into rabbinical school, which tells you a lot about my personality. But I've loved Torah study. I've loved Midrash. And I just assumed that Midrash was written by other people and that I had to find Midrash that I liked. And I did. I found collections of Midrashim that I loved and that were really meaningful to me. And then several years ago, one of Marla and my colleagues, Rabbi Paul Kipnis, emailed me out of the blue. We had never met and said, I want to write a Midrash about Jacob and I want a female rabbi's voice in that Midrash. Would you like to be a part of that? And I assumed that he had written to the wrong person because I had been ordained for 2 years. Any idea that I would be creating rabbinic content rather than just doing a good job of filtering it to myself and to my congregation, I thought that I would have to wait decades and decades, if ever, to be able to do that. But Paul offered that hand and I accepted. And what came of it was that we started this project together, Midrashic Monologues. And with this project, we went through the text and every week of the Torah portion, we'd say, whose voice haven't we heard yet? And sometimes the voices were people that were named. And sometimes they were people I made up. And so sometimes the answer was a perspective hadn't been heard and I had to make a voice for that. But it was an attempt to humanize these biblical characters. And interestingly, one of the characters that we started with is Jacob, and he is my least favorite. I want to say, to be very candid with you. I'm very involved in Judaism. I'm dedicated for the life. I'm on it for the lifelong journey, but I don't love Jacob. And maybe that's because I'm named Rachel and I feel for Jacob's wives and who aren't always given.
Well, he's a weasel too. So yeah, I don't like him.
Yes, there are definitely weaselly moments, and I appreciate your candidness because I agree. Yeah, there are moments where you're like, who is this man? Why do we care about him? Why are we trying to lift him up? But I will tell you that when Paul suggested Jacob, I said, what if we wrote about literally anyone else? And so then we first wrote about Rachel and Benjamin, and then we wrote about Jacob. And in the process of writing about Jacob, I discovered for myself a less cartoonish character. And that was an incredible gift. So I went from seeing only the weaselly parts, to use Lee's very apt word choice, to trying to give him something that I could relate to. Because the Torah is beautiful, sacred literature, but it is not a source of great depth for character development, right? We kind of skim along people's lives. And the opportunity to write Midrash is to take that skim and then go deep for a second and try to explain it. And so Paul and I wrote Jacob blessing Dinah, because if you're familiar with the end of Genesis, Jacob calls all of his sons together and goes through each of them and offers them, it's called a blessing, but sometimes it's more of a rebuke because Jacob is the tough guy. But Dinah doesn't appear. She actually has disappeared from the story well in advance of that. And so I said to Paul, what if we gave them an opportunity to actually interact like a father and a daughter might? And that's what we wrote. And what came of that was a Jacob that I could understand, at least. He's not perfect. He's not, heroic in every moment, but he's a person. And that was a huge gift as a rabbi who praise his name every time we're leading prayers. I no longer kind of flinch and think, oh, I don't like Jacob. I think he was a flawed human being, and that felt like a gift. I'm rambling because I love Midrash, and Marla, what else did you want me to say here? I get so excited that I forget.
So I'm gonna, hold on. So when we were talking last week, one of the things that came out of it is once we really delve into the characters, it's like they become friends to us and we get to know them. So it's in some ways, it's the way that we kind of insert ourselves into the text, but beyond that, it's a way that we build relationships with the characters in the text. Or if it's not a character, it could be a moment or an experience where we can place ourselves. So this week we're talking about, we're at the Song of the Sea and Shabbat Shirah, which were, this big celebration of singing at the sea. And, we can imagine standing there among the Israelites singing at the top of our voices, or, the Debbie Friedman song of Miriam dancing with the women. And because there's a line in the text that Miriam led the women dancing. Like I could imagine myself in a big circle holding hands with all the women singing and dancing and just like the highest of highs. And so being able to place ourselves in the text, to me, that's sort of the flavor of Midrash, the inspiration that I get from it, that it's not just a text over there, but it's my text and it's my story, which I think is a theme that like is reiterated in Judaism over and over. Like the story of the Exodus is our story. We were slaves in the land of Egypt, not just those guys back then, thousands of years ago. And so what's always been hard for me when I study text, and we talked about this too, is that women's voices in particular are absent. And so remind me what the title of your sermon was. I put it away already, but it was about women's.
It was about finding and honoring women's voices, which is kind of like the subtitle of my rabbinate, I think, at this point. It's just, yeah.
Right. And so much for me too, when I wrote my rabbinic thesis, it was about reclaiming Hagar. Right. I don't remember what I called it. It's over there. Reclaiming Hagar, her voice. And because it's really, you don't hear that much and we don't really know who she is. And she's almost like a throwaway character, which is something that the Midrash is able to take these people and make them come alive for us in a way that, when we're just reading the text, it's so easy to skip over, but that we build relationships with them through this.
Right.
So does anybody have any questions at this point? Like, let's stop and see. And no, I didn't think you were rambling, by the way.
Well, it wouldn't be out of character, but
No questions. Last week, I just want
I'd
to
like
tell
to talk
you.
about what he did to his brother, because that's the story that bugs me the most about Jacob. He tricked him, and really, what did Esau do to deserve that treatment?
Right.
He was the dad's favorite son, and obviously Jacob was the mama's boy, and it just seems like Esau was such a good son to his father, and went and hunted, and he was like today's football player.
Okay, I always call him the cowboy in my mind. Yes, because he is the outdoorsman. But so Lee, to Marla's point and to yours, what I found really empowering is that we are not the first generation of people to write ourselves into the text. Since the text has existed, people have been writing Midrash about their concerns, about their viewpoints, and projecting them back in the text. So, for example, one of the criticisms of my Midrashim that I sometimes get is, well, this person wasn't a feminist. It's not like Zipporah was a feminist. And so why are you writing her as a feminist, for example? And fine, Zipporah wasn't a feminist as we know it, but the idea that we should be able to project ourselves into the text is something that we have inherited from the Jewish tradition of people who have been projecting themselves into the text. So we are following in their footsteps. And Lee, one of the midrashim that I love was written about 2,000 years ago. And the rabbis are as concerned about Jacob's trickery with Esau as it sounds like you are and as I have myself been. And so they write scenes where Isaac and Rebekah, before Isaac dies, call both of the boys back and make them promise to one another that they will live honorably with one another and that there will be no more feuding. And this Midrash allows them and actually forces the two young men at this point to come back and repair some of their relationship. So whether or not we like what Jacob did, I like the fact that for 2,000 years, people have been uncomfortable with it because it means that my discomfort is well within that tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to say, Marla, you reminded me that the Midrash that I want to share today is about the splitting of the sea. So I thought that would be appropriate for the weekly Torah portion. But it's women's voices and other minority voices, right? LGBTQ voices, other, even just male voices who aren't what the tradition has lifted up, right? There are so many of us who would have been actively silenced or kind of shunted to the side for 2,000 years, but no one has owned the text more than we do at this moment, right? We are as much owners of the text as any other generation has been. And so that means that we can follow in the footsteps of our ancestors, whether they are spiritual ancestors, whether we have been Jewish for 2,000 years. We have inherited that text and it is as much ours as anybody else's. And we have the ability to make it what we need it to be.
I so appreciate that perspective that that it's as much ours as it was in generations past, because I think so often we think they were the deep scholars, they were the ones who took they spent their lives studying text, and they, and they really knew the text inside and out. And it's just as much our text today as it was, hundreds of years ago or even thousands of years ago. And so I think that really means a lot to me to hear you say that. I just also want to comment to Lee. I think a lot of the time the text is supposed to remind us, this is my opinion, of course, that the struggles that we have are not ours alone and that other people have them. So when brothers fight, which is a common theme throughout Torah, when women are struggling with fertility, which is a common theme throughout Torah, when all these things happen, that we're not alone in the struggle, right? And so knowing that other people struggle with the same things and have the same challenges and that overcome them, like Jacob and Esau at the end reconcile, but so do Isaac and Ishmael reconcile,
Yeah.
right? So now Cain and Abel don't reconcile, but that's not possible. I read a really interesting interpretation though of that text recently. And actually I think that's reality too. You know, sometimes we don't reconcile, but that these conflicts that occur in families, they're unfortunately as much normal as the good family relationships that we see. So while our focus today and in a lot of modern midrash that has evolved through the feminist movement is focused on these minority groups, I think that even the like mainstream midrash to teach us that like that everything that we do and who we are is okay too, and it's part of a tradition and part of our story is really important.
Lee, do you want to say anything else? Because Marla, you reminded me of the other main takeaway that I have from Midrash.
Great.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm enjoying the discussion.
Okay, because I wrote it down this time so I wouldn't forget. But the piece of writing Midrash that has been the most transformative is not only the realization that I own the text as much as my ancestors did, and not just because I'm a rabbi, but just because I am engaged with it. So that means that all of us on this call, all of us in the Jewish community, own the text as much as anyone else has ever owned it. But also that we are all capable of writing the stories that we need to read and writing the lessons that we are searching for. And that came to me a year and a half into writing Midrash. I still struggled with it. And it was a couple years ago, I think 2 years ago for Rosh Hashanah Day 2, I normally tell a story. In Connecticut I did. And I could not find one. I could not find what I was looking for. And it took until I went home after leading Rosh Hashanah Day 1 services. And I was, frantic at that point, just freaking out, trying to find a story. And it was 6 o'clock at night. And then I literally remembered, oh wait, I write Midrashim. I've been writing Midrashim for a year or two at that point. But it didn't feel natural to me. And then I wrote the story that I had been looking for because I wanted a story where Isaac and Ishmael reconciled, but we saw the fallout for both of them. And it took me that long after being an active, participant in Midrash to realize, wait, I have the ability to write the story I'm looking for. And in that case, I was looking for it because I wanted to lead services. But in other moments, especially I'll say during this pandemic, where I just have like feelings that I don't know where to go with, or I don't know what to do with, I've used them to write the stories that I needed to read at that moment, and find myself in those experiences. And that has transformed the way that I relate to Judaism. That everything is an opportunity to write myself into the story and to write what I am, or to create what I am looking for.
One of the cool things that I see, Rachel, is that I'm a bar and bat mitzvah tutor.
Yeah.
And I don't try to influence my students too much about their Devorah Torah. I want to see what they think. Like, what do you think? And it's incredible to watch their little minds all of a sudden go, whoa.
Yeah.
And they'll come up with stuff that, it makes sense. Yeah. And to watch them go with it is really cool. So yeah, it's just as much their text as it is ours.
As anybody's. And writing Midrash with teenagers is so exciting because they have no boundaries. Right. So I worked with my confirmation students once, and one of my students wrote a Midrash about Noah's wife and how she got so sick of Noah that she threw herself off the ark. And I was like, this is something I would have never imagined, but okay, I'm hearing you, I'm processing with you. I mean, but there are no boundaries for them. So there's just excitement. I totally agree. And it's inspiring to feel like that kind of freedom. So just process wise, in case you're wondering and I'm hoping that you're writing your own Midrash, and I can't wait to hear back from Marla how that goes. The way I start is with a question. So I read the text.
We talked about that's how the rabbis do it. What's the problem with the text? What's the question?
Right. So even just kind of, what's this person doing in the story? Or why would they have said that? Or I wonder what that felt like. And then just proposing an answer and deciding if I like the answer enough to try to make it real or not. one of the other techniques, I don't know if we have any Harry Potter fans on the call today, but there's this thing in Harry Potter where they go into memories, where they dive into memories and they can look all around. And that's what I imagine doing. So I imagine the scene as if it was a documentary film crew has got the camera pointed normally at like Moses, for example, during the splitting of the sea. But then I imagine that I dive into the scene and turn around. So if Moses is right in front of me, I might want to write about what Moses is thinking and feeling, but my own biases tend to push me to say, okay, Moses is there. Who's over here? Like if the camera and the text is pointed here, I am concerned about what's happening here. So I think to myself when I read The Splitting of the Sea, and that's what I'll share, if that's still okay. What's Yocheved thinking? What's Moses's mother thinking? And as Marla said, when you write Midrash, you sometimes develop these relationships with the characters. And two of the ones that I found the most fascinating and that I keep coming back to are Moses's mothers. So Yocheved is his birth mother, and Batya is the daughter of Pharaoh who adopts him and raises him. So I see them both as his mothers. So I am fascinated by these two women. So I think, okay, Moses is doing his thing. We all know that story. We all saw the movies and everything. We got that part. What are Yocheved and Batya thinking in this moment while their son is splitting the Red Sea? And that's what I wrote in this Midrash. So before I share it, does anyone have any questions or comments on any of that?
Okay, I'm going to spotlight you again.
Okay, great. Marilyn, did you have a question or comment?
I do. I'm just fascinated by the thought that you see Moses's adoptive mother there. I would never even think she was Egyptian. Why would she have even come? Or how did she come there?
So, okay, all of those questions, by the way, are ones that you could write midrashim about. So first of all, so those are great questions. The rabbis say that she was rewarded. So these are I often try to weave in classical midrashic elements, like, okay, so this is what they say, then what does it mean? So the classical element is that the rabbis say that Batya was rewarded for her faithfulness, for her care for Moses, by the ultimate prize for any woman in the biblical story, according to the rabbis, is marrying a nice Israelite boy. Okay. So they married her to a nice Israelite boy and said that she accompanied them out of Egypt. But that was really it. That was the whole story. So, and even if they hadn't, even if they said she didn't, why couldn't she? That's my question always. Why couldn't this be a real thing?
I love it. It's a great idea.
And then so I don't have her married yet because that is less important for me to marry her to a nice Israelite boy. But for me, I remember shifting my gaze and thinking, what did Yocheved think? And then I thought, more importantly, maybe, or more interestingly, what did his mother, who had no connections to this people, think? Right? I mean, Yocheved is enmeshed in her own people, but Batya is just like, she's there because of Moses, and that's it. And that just felt like just so the endless possibilities.
You know that she was at the sea? We know that?
Well, I wasn't there, so I am trusting the rabbinic.
Yes, you were.
I'm that old, 14,000 years old. And I've seen pictures, but the rabbis imagine that she came with the Israelites. So in theory, she would have been with them because she left. But if there's a gap, regardless of how big that gap or small that gap is, then I can fill it with whatever I want, because rabbis for 2,000 years have been filling it with whatever they want. So I am proposing that she came along.
Couldn't she have possibly just stayed in Egypt and said, "Oh my God, look what I'm partly responsible for"?
Is
Absolutely.
he a mama's boy?
Sorry?
Is he a mama's boy? And she had to go along with him because she was protecting
He
him?
was a tough guy. You know,
Well,
the version of Moses that I find most interesting and that I've written is actually he suffered so much trauma. Moses suffered so much trauma in his life that he has a vulnerability to him that I find really compelling. Despite that vulnerability, he does incredible things. And that's what I find really inspiring, actually. But so Lee, she could have stayed. I'd love to read a midrash about how she felt when she saw them all leave, right? And imagining this character whose heart was so big that she picked an Israelite baby up out of the river, watching all of the slaves escape from Egypt. I mean, that would be an incredible piece of a gift, really, an incredible gift. But if she comes, then she interacts with Yocheved, which is what I found so exciting. So is it okay, Marla, if I share the screen and
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight you again. And if anybody wants to put you back on gallery, that's fine. Oh, your screen sharing. So never mind. We'll just do that.
okay. So yes, that's right. I forgot that screen share overrides it. So this, first of all, is the website that Rabbi Kipnis and I publish our Midrashim on. I also, in case you're like, wow, this woman's voice is something I'd like to explore. I also have my own website, just rabbirachelbierman.com, where I publish my own Midrash as well. So this one is a couple years old, and just as an aside, Paul and I made a very concerted effort to represent diversity in all of our graphics, because while we're imagining ourselves into the story, why not imagine the full beauty of our diversity as a Jewish people into the story as well? So Yocheved and Batya, and this one is called Women and Water. And it's written from the perspectives of Yocheved and Batya. And I guess I'll read it, and then I want to hear what you think. And it's always an appropriate response to say, this doesn't do anything for me, or this doesn't add meaning, or I don't buy it. All of those are appropriate responses to any midrash you read, and that's fine, because it's not always about meaning for everyone. So this is from Yocheved. Have you ever stood outside of a moment? Have you ever experienced something so viscerally with so many of your senses that you found yourself turning it over and over again, as if to study every facet of that experience? That is the way I feel standing a short distance behind my youngest son, my baby, my Moses, as he looks out at the Red Sea. I am close enough to see that his arm is shaking as he lifts it. When I notice his trembling, I start forward, hoping to offer him my support. But my husband, Amram, stops me, asking me quietly to wait. Honoring his request, I look back at my son and see that his wife, Zipporah, has also noticed Moses' weakness and moves to him swiftly, laying a hand on his shoulder and whispering to him intently. I watch as my new daughter uses her arm to brace my son's. I see Moses nod, acknowledging her words and her presence, and then with renewed faith, turn to the sea. And now from Batya. Have you ever felt completely disconnected from a moment you inhabited? Have you ever been so surprised to find yourself in a place or within a group that every facet of the experience feels unreal? That is exactly how I feel standing on the shore of the Red Sea. I was a princess of Egypt. The vast majority of my life has been lived within the walls of the palace, and yet here I stand, no longer royalty. When my beloved son returns to our home, demanding freedom for the Israelites, I knew right away that I would never again allow anything to separate me from my Moses. If he was taking his people out of Egypt, then I would be leaving with him too. So here I am, just one member of the mixed multitude that follows him. I watch as Moses raises his staff over the water. I smile as his Zipporah moves closer to him, offering him her support. Gazing back to the sea, I try to blink back, tears in my eyes. The baby that the river once brought to me is again dependent on women and water. I can only hope that this moment, both treat him as kindly as we, his mothers, did all those years ago. Yocheved. When the east wind begins to blow and the water starts to tremble, a rush of energy vibrates along and through my son's body. It is as if he is the conduit between the God above and the mysteries of the deep sea below. Zipporah wraps herself around him, trying to steady and strengthen him as power flows and churns around all of us. My heart is full of fear for my son, and I turn to catch the eye of the woman who raised my Moses, the woman who protected him when I could not. Batya, once a princess, and I, once a protector. have been walking together for the last day or so, taking turns sharing our memories of the boy we both loved and our dreams for the man our boy is becoming. Even before I look for her, I can sense her presence at my side. It feels right for us to stand together as we watch our son fulfill his destiny as God's agent in our world. Batya, I lock eyes with Yocheved, the first mother of my son, and we reach for one another. Like Zipporah and Moses, we stand engulfed in power, holding onto each other so tightly that it is as if we are one. That it is as if we are one another's only tether to this world. And then miraculously in a rush, the waters part, and suddenly all of us are propelled forward, propelled toward freedom, reborn. All throughout the caravan, fear and frustration dissipate and are replaced, at least momentarily, with the giddy joy that comes after any birth. Moses has delivered us into a new world, into a new existence. Yocheved's daughter Miriam lets out a wild yell and rushes into the space between the seas. She begins to sing and dance, undaunted by the squish of the wet sand that lines our path through the waters. As if unfrozen by her celebration, the people follow her lead, flooding into the space Moses' God has made. Yocheved. Batya and I continue to stand locked together. We watch our son worrying together. Moses is bent at the waist and breathing raggedly. He looks exhausted, depleted, as if he had run for many miles in the heat of the day. It seems as if Zipporah and her unyielding will are the only reasons he still stands upright. I can feel Batya's fear for our son's life. I am feeling much of the same thing. For many moments, the two of us stand completely still, afraid for our boy. Batya. Suddenly, a change comes over Moses. Yocheved and I simultaneously sigh in relief. When his breath begins to smooth, we lean forward, watching, fearful, hopeful. Then suddenly Moses turns to face us. His smile glows so brightly that Yocheved and I stand bathed in light. He throws his arms around Zipporah and both of them laugh and cry tears of relief at having bested this latest challenge. In the face of their joy, I turn to my sister, the first mother of my son. Her face is filled with pride, and I know that mine is a perfect reflection of hers. We embrace one another, offering silent gratitude for the strength that the other instilled within our son. Each of us understands exactly what it took for Moses to survive the day's events. Without either of us, he would not have had enough within him to do the work of his God. Yocheved. I follow Zipporah and her boys into the sea. I watch as Batya, still unsure of her place and our people, moves slowly, staying behind me, offering me the higher position. I reach back, offering my hand, calling out to her loudly and with great purpose. Batya, daughter of the sea, the second mother of Moses, join me as we together travel into our new life. She hurries to my side and offers me a smile that speaks to our shared stories, our shared destinies. We walk together through the waters. When we reach the other side, Moses stands on the shore, arms open wide, waiting for us. He smiles at Zipporah and chuckles when his sons use their arms to demonstrate the size of the fish they had seen. And then our son turns to the two of us. He offers us his hands, draws us from the water, and brings us into our new lives. He says, Imahot Shali, walk before me. I am honored to follow in the footsteps of my mothers.
Pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I will admit and be very honest that I get emotional reading it, which feels insane because I wrote it, but it feels like, to Marla's point earlier, it feels like I know these women now. And it feels like hearing them tell me a story that was a critical one for them and for their lives. And one of my goals in writing this is that often, and this happens with both the men and the women in the Torah, people who should be on the same team, right? Who should be partners, like brothers, like Jacob and Esau, or Isaac and Ishmael, or Hagar and Sarah. They're depicted as opposites and as rivals. Mm-hmm. And so the opportunity to tell a story where these women appreciate one another, and who both of them contributed to the making of this son, this Moses, was one of my main goals. But I want to hear what you think about the idea of it. Anything, any comment.
We sing a song in our service, standing on the shoulders of the one who came before. And that's what I'm thinking of when I hear that. Everybody has helpers in their lives. And that's what we have to look for. We can't just look for the bad. We have to, when something bad happens, we have to look for those beacons, those that are doing good.
That's really powerful. Yes, this is a story of Devorah, of the generations that support us, and also the ones who might not be our ancestors, but who are there to make it happen. That's really powerful.
It's sort of like you're writing a historic romance type thing, what you're doing, and you could just publish it and it would go big seller type thing.
I'm taking that as the highest compliment, Ruth, because I have loved historical fiction since I'm a big reader, and there's so much power in reading these stories about our historical figures or our characters, made emotional. So thank you for that. And I will send you a copy if it ever does get published anywhere else there.
That sounds good.
All right, we can make that happen.
Well, there is something to that, the sense of fantasy.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's unique to, I don't think that's unique to modern Midrash. I think that throughout Midrash, I shared with everybody a text about, can you guys mute yourselves if you're not talking? Sorry. If I shared a Midrash last week, or Tuesday, about when Sarah's breasts become like fountains of milk. These rabbis, it's like their fantasies of what could be in the Torah, or like trying to imagine, just imagine a response or a reality. So there is a kind of connection to historical fiction or historical fantasy writing in some way. The key thing that we talked about Tuesday, and is really important here too, is that it is tied to the text. Like, we're not just creating fantasy out of nothing. That whether it's one word or one letter or a whole story, that our modern Midrash, or Midrash in general, is based in text. And as far-fetched as you want to go, great. Like Noah's wife jumping overboard, kind of love that idea, actually. Maybe there was a little raft that she could have picked up. But anyway, so I just feel like it's really important that we say that we're connected to text, but like, let's imagine the possibilities.
Yes. And the more that you read of ancient Midrash, or at least the more that I read, the more that I feel free in creating my own vision. Because like my 10th grader who wrote about Moses, or Noah's wife, there were no boundaries for the ancient rabbis. So in the ancient Midrashim, one question that I always think of is, the rabbis asked, how did the frogs arrive in Egypt for the plague? And their answer was that they came through the earth, broke in between the tiles, and then spurted out in between the tiles. So if that can happen in Midrash, then Zipporah wrapping herself around Moses, which is not in the text, could happen as well. The text doesn't say anything about where Zipporah is in this moment, so why couldn't she be next to Moses?
Right. Actually, that's the first thing I wrote down as you were reading. I love Zipporah's role here. Again, something I hadn't really thought about. Where was Zipporah in this text, in this story? And I wrote down like half a page of notes here as you were writing. I just really love this Midrash. And I'd like to hear what other people have to say, but Zipporah's role, and then like the mother role versus the wife role, right? Like, they're different. They're these two women who are watching their son with a lot of pride and also fear and awe and all of the other things. But his wife is the one who's standing next to him. And that's real life too, right? Once our children grow and they pick a partner and they go on to their new stage of life, like, as parents, we take on a really different role. So I thought that was really interesting the way you did that. Maybe a couple comments on Rabbi Bierman's text, and then I'd like to actually, well, let's see where we stand, but I'd like to hear from you guys on what you're thinking about you want to do for your texts. Sheila?
Oh, I was fascinated by the relationship of the two mothers.
Yeah.
because it's something that I never really thought about, but having this adoptive mother and the birth mother being able to both accept the fact that they had a child that they shared just absolutely blew me away. And I say thank you for that. I mean, really, it's almost like something that one could use as a teaching tool in difficult situations.
Thank you.
Because they could have been jealous of each other and not nice to each other.
Well,
But
that's why I
Yeah.
just thought that it's a wonderful teaching tool
Yeah.
in a situation where people are having issues with that.
They came together.
Can I,
Not to-
can I
Any
answer that?
magic comment, but Karen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I was thinking it reminds me of how people take turns raising someone in their life. And it might be a stepmother coming in or an aunt. But when you see that when people are supported, then they're not taking credit. They're taking joy in the other, the child that they love mutually. And it's not about them. It's about the support that allows someone to flourish.
Thank you.
Love
That's
that.
beautiful.
Not taking credit, but taking joy. That's really
Yeah.
powerful. Thank you.
Cindy?
Yeah, hopping on to what Marla had said, the mothers wanting to move forward, that sense, and then the one husband saying, no, stay back. It's not your place. Hang on, stay back. Because how many of us just want to rush in and help, and yet realizing that there are those boundaries and there is that place where we do step in and where we don't. And then the other piece that I really loved was once they got to the other side, again, there is that the first embrace was for his wife, and then he drew both of his mothers in at the same time, which was really beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautifully written, really magnificent. Thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you. I love the idea of Moses as a family man. I know, Marla, we have other places. I could talk. I told you
That's okay.
hours and hours and hours. But
we want to hear from you.
but Moses as a family man is something that's actually sacrificed in the text in order for Moses the prophet to emerge. So in imagining that we had 15 hours for this class, despite being told that we did not, one of the midrashim that I also brought is the one that I wrote about Zipporah's life being transformed by Moses's revelation.
Ooh, can we hear that?
I mean, it's so long. So I will I'll send it to you. How about I'll send a link and you can send it out. But I imagine them in this oasis in the desert and her saying to him, are you going to be my husband still? Like, I imagine their relationship, trying to figure that out, and him thinking yes, and then Aaron showing up and Zipporah's world changing. So coming back to Zipporah and their relationship, and not to do any spoilers, but I also imagine Zipporah eventually saying that she's not going to stay with him because he has sacrificed his family life in order to become the prophet he needed to be, which I also think is an important dynamic to understand, and is not one that makes him a villain, but makes him more human in my mind. He could not do everything perfectly. So I love the Zipporah that lives in my head is a partner who eventually becomes estranged, and tragically so, but has that strength throughout. And so I love kind of coming back to her at different moments and seeing what she would do.
Oh, how I love that. And it feels like that's like what Ruth was saying earlier about like the story, like it's such a powerful, strong story and real, and I think a lot of women feel that way, that they can't be the prophet and the family leader that they want to be. But to hear that from Moses, I think is so powerful, because again, the struggle is not ours alone, but that it is a struggle that men and women have, and that ancient and modern peoples struggle with. So thank you. I wish we could do this on and on. Okay. So any questions?
Marilyn has it.
It's not really a question, but one of the things that really fit where I am is the idea of these two women from two different cultures and backgrounds and religions focusing on the child they created together, the family they created together. And that's such a real issue for this time, with interfaith marriages, which is part of my life as a parent and grandparent. that it meant a lot to me to hear how important, how that coming together supersedes any differences that might exist.
Right. And that is not something I intentionally wrote into it, the interfaith aspect of it, but Marilyn, listening to you talk about it, I'm reminded of many moments where I've stood in awe of my Jewish grandmother and my Catholic grandmother coming together and watching as I became bat mitzvah, all of these moments where they could not have been more different, these women, and their family brought them together. So it's a reflection of my own life and my own story that I wasn't even aware of. So I'm grateful to you for pulling that out, because that seems like I'm a gift connecting to my grandmothers again. So thank you for that.
Could I ask Cindy to just, can you elaborate on the comment? Because I'm not sure what you're referring to. Isn't that alluded to in the intro?
I'm referring to when Rachel said that she had seen, because of Moses and the responsibilities he had,
Yep.
that his wife would want to walk away.
Yes.
And yet in Yitro, you have Moses, who is completely overwhelmed with everything he's doing. And then his father-in-law comes in and says, look, you got to delegate.
Right.
Which would then allow him some time to go back to his family.
Well, and
so
to your point, in Yitro, Jethro is bringing Zipporah and their sons back to Moses. So we never hear what happens to Zipporah. So I imagine that after they continue wandering in the wilderness, she realizes that this is beyond what she is willing or able to continue with. So that estrangement is absolutely, that's the piece of the text that I pulled in and then wrote something more. I also just want to say, I know that I wrote about women in this Midrash, and I often write about women because that's something that I feel passionate about. But I've also written as men and about men, and that one of the ones that I also brought in this imagined world where we would have time to read 15 Midrashim together, is a story of two gay men, or two men who love one another, who are not, it's not a secret, it's not a shame, right? Like Moses goes and asks them both to be elders that go up Mount Sinai. So it's the opportunity to write what we wish we could see, and to grapple with the reality as we knew it. And sometimes, to Ruth's point, to put that reality aside and write the historical fiction that we are searching for, right? So
I just love that. I'm so inspired. I can't wait to go through and read all of them as if I have time. But it's
Right.
so amazing. The work that you and Paul Kipnis have done is just tremendous. I'm really in awe of it. And I'm so glad that you were here to share with us. So I want you to stick around for just a few more minutes, if you don't mind. We're going to turn this to you now. So last week, I keep saying that, 2 days ago, we looked at some ancient Midrash and how the rabbis wrote Midrash. And today we learned from Rabbi Bierman about modern Midrash. And now it's your turn to sort of take pen to paper. And so last week I asked you to kind of think about what character you liked, what story spoke to you, where you wanted to find yourself in the text, or who you want to interact with. So if you don't mind, either unmute or put in the chat who you're thinking about. And then individually over the course of the next few days, I can send you some materials, or you can Google. Google is like tech studies best friend these days. There's so much out there, and I would recommend that you start reading what's there, and then take the jump off from that. So as was mentioned, both of us, in the way that we've written Midrash, take the ancient text and weave it throughout our text, so that it's not just fantasy, but that it has some rootedness in text. So I don't want you to feel like, obviously we want your story to be your story. If all you want to do is read the text and go from there, that's great. But if you want to kind of read what some of the other midrashim say, like for example, when I wrote my Hagar midrash, it's taught that Hagar was actually a princess, and she was the daughter of a great pharaoh. So and it was actually something that when I shared it with Rachel, she brought out in the text. So that was something that I brought into it. Just different pieces that the ancient rabbis might have given, like little characteristics they might have given to the rabbis. We might want that information. Same when I did Vashti. Okay, so Anita, you're gonna look at Sipporah about, an idea that Sipporah gets leprosy for Lashon Hara, not Miriam. How interesting. I'd like to know what you come up with on that. Are you gonna say something?
I meant Miriam. We were talking
meant
about
Miriam.
Sephora. I
Oh,
meant
because
Miriam.
Sipporah could also engage. You never
Yeah,
know.
for sure. After that conversation. Yeah, I meant
I
Miriam.
mean, actually, it's really interesting because I wonder what the relationship between Miriam and Zipporah is, because they're sisters-in-law, right? And if Miriam is talking about, Moses marrying the Cushite woman, we don't know if the Cushite woman is Zipporah or if it's somebody else. We just don't know that. So, who knows who she was talking to or whatever. So that's interesting. Moses, when he's told he cannot enter the land of Israel because of his hitting the rock, looking at anger and God's punishment. I like that, Simona. Really a nice idea. If you guys want any support on this, I'm happy to help you. Got it. Devorah, Doreen wants to talk about Deborah the judge. Great. And Diana and Lila are doing their namesake. So that's Dina, and I'm guessing it's Leah. Is that right?
Or Lilith.
Oh, or Lilith, whose story is in the text that I gave you last week. So, so that would be good. Okay. Please send supporting info. That's to Simona on God's anger. All right. Well, you and I maybe should have a nice conversation. And then we can go from there.
Marla, I also wanted to recommend, if that's okay, a couple of my favorite collections of modern Midrash.
Please.
The Queering the Text is a creation, or is a collection of midrashim of voices that are LGBTQ and are so incredibly beautiful that I have used them in Torah study for years, regardless of one's own orientation. They're just powerful, powerful examples. Sisters at Sinai is a classic, and for a good reason. Rabbi Jill Hammer is just amazing. And then this one, Lilith's Ark, Teenage Tales of Biblical Women. It's just one of my favorites. And Marla, I think you'll love the Sarah and Hagar piece in here.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. I might have read it back when I did my, I don't know how old that book is. I think it's old, right?
No, I don't know if it's that old. It's written by one of our colleagues, 2006.
Oh, cool. Modern Midrash or traditional Midrash?
Modern Midrash, written about the matriarchs as if they were teenagers.
Ooh, what fun.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
I'm going to order those, you guys. And then if you want to borrow them or, look at them, we'll put them in the library or in my office. So.
And then my website is Midrashic Monologues.com. And if you go to RabbiRachelBierman.com, it'll link from there. And I don't know, Marla can ever give anybody my email address if anybody has questions, but you are in very good hands with Marla.
Thank you. Did Simona leave already? Shoot. If you remember, she was retiring today and I wanted to do a big mazel tov to her. So if you remember, send her a text and say mazel tov to Simona.
Well, hold on, I got to get off.
I think she already left. She had a
computer. Hold on.
I want to say thank you. If anybody wants to reach out to me directly over the course of the next few days, please do so. And I'll help you. Otherwise, just go at it. Read the text, read what's out there online. And you don't need to write as long as the midrash that you heard today. You can write a paragraph, right? It can be a few lines. It could be a few thoughts, like bullet points, right? So I don't want the writing of it to intimidate you, but I do want you to try your hand at it, because next Tuesday when we meet, I'd like to hear what you've done. So many, many thanks, Rabbi Rachel Bierman, for being with us and sharing your midrashim and your websites. And I think we're all really inspired by you, and hopefully we're getting ready to put our own pen to paper, or you can type it. And thank you for being with us. And I hope that you'll come back another time.
I would love to. I'm so honored, Marla, by the invitation. And I love studying this and talking about every aspect of the text. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with all of you. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you
come.
so much. This was excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And thanks you everybody for engaging in the conversation, because it's so much more fun when it's a dialogue.
Yeah. Now we're all Torah geeks.
Good. Well, Torah geeks, go forth and study.